All right, welcome. So if you remember, in the first session, we had three very interesting case studies. One was the subway hero. Then we had a baby that was hit and run, and that was just left on the side. And then we had the drowning child in a pond. And we were contemplating, when would we help? When do people step in? When do people care? When do people have empathy? When do people have something that they would risk themselves, either their lives or their time or their money, in order to help somebody else? And at the beginning, it sounded like a very vague, broad case study, maybe something that doesn't, how do you even do research on this kind of thing? How do you model this kind of thing? We gave some examples for some studies, starting from Peter Singer as a philosopher, and some people in the effective altruism movement that took what Peter Singer did and tried to move this into charity. And today I'm going to step into more of these findings, and I'm going to show you some of the biggest experiments that have ever been run in psychology, in the domain of social psychology, and things that I think you're probably familiar with, but it's worthwhile taking you step by step in order to see what is it that we know, what is it that we don't know, and explore these things together, okay? All right, so we have some classic moral dilemmas. You're probably familiar with this. You've seen this like a million times. The trolley problem. How many of you have seen this before? Raise your hand. Trolley problem. Did somebody not see this before? Is somebody not familiar with the trolley dilemma? So what can you see here? What's happening here? What is the trolley problem situation? Yeah, so the person here facing a decision, which person are we talking about? The person with the lever, right? So what's the decision? What's the situation? Right, yeah, very good. So we have this very familiar situation. It's dating back to the 1960s and 70s. And now it's a very popular paradigm for thinking about costs and benefits. It seems like the framing here is that there's a runaway trolley, or this train is going down the tracks and it's going forward. And if you do nothing, it's going to hit 5 people who are standing on these tracks, not aware of what's going on, right? I don't know why they're not aware. Don't they see everything? What's happening over there? We have a lot of questions that we might ask here. But for some reason, here they're just standing there. In some of the situations with the trolley dilemma, they're kind of tied to the rail, so they can't really move for some reason. Sometimes they are hurt or something like that. But here, it seems like they're unaware. They're talking to each other. They don't see that trolley is coming. And then there's this other path that the trolley can take, but will not go there by default, where there's only one person who is unaware that this might hit. And then we have this person, the decision maker. This is us, like we're facing this dilemma. So we need to picture ourselves as if we're this person. And there's this lever, there's this switch that you can take. So if you do something, if you do nothing, it will keep on going on the same track and it will hit 5 people. But if you pull the lever, then it will go to a different track and then it will hit the one person. So you've seen this many, many times before. What do most people answer to this paradigm? What would most people do here? Pull the lever. Why? Do you want to explain a little bit? Right. Yeah, very good. So you mentioned a lot of things in there. It starts to resemble a little bit some of the decisions that we had in last week. So there is some level of action that is involved in choosing between a person's life and another person's life. Here, we also have numbers. We have 1 versus the 5, right? And then we have another aspect, which is whether you take action or not take action. And you link this to whether you did something about this, and then maybe it's tied to accountability. So maybe people are saying to themselves, if I do nothing, it has nothing to do with me. The train goes and kills the 5 people. But if I pull the lever, then I did something. I caused the train. I caused the trolley to go to the other track, and I killed the other person, right? Utilitarian approach that says we need to value the number of lives saved, right? So 1 versus 5, very easy math, right? We just choose the 1 over the 5. We don't want 5 people to die if we can just make this about the 1. However, there's a complication here. There's action versus inaction. And somehow action is tied to accountability. It's tied to intention. It's tied to a decision that somebody made in order to cause something to happen that led to somebody's death. Therefore, some people feel that if they pull the lever, then they cause the 1 person to die. And they feel responsible for the 1 person. In general, there's something a little bit weird about this. And this is where the psychology comes into play. Like, if you didn't do something, is this not still your responsibility? Are you not accountable for not taking action? So a lot of things to consider over here. Maybe we can just take a vote here, if you don't mind. How many of you would pull the lever? Raise your hand. Many of you would? Yeah, good. Thank you. How many of you would not pull the lever? Some of you? Yeah. A relative minority, but still significant minority here. So here it's a little bit more like how. Now, what are the possible complications here? One person is a baby. Yeah, so we can play with all kinds of features here. What would making the one person a baby mean? What would that change? Yeah, interesting. So now we have the differences between people, right? So a baby would make it maybe valued more, right, than an adult, right? What else would make this valued more? Good. So there's an adult with a little person inside her to come out. Very good. What else would make it even more valuable? Sorry, social status, for example, a more valued person like a psychologist. Wow. Okay. Good. So it's interesting that you say some people would value perhaps a psychologist more and will think that maybe think twice before doing that. Very good. What else would bring this to? Yes, please. Like criminals, you mean? Oh, okay. They did some crime, right? So we can change not only the one person, but we can also change the five, right? So we can do all kinds of things in the description of the people who are involved in order to change the paradigm. What else can we do in order to really shift things in the paradigm? A family member, yeah, that takes it to a whole different level, right? So if this is a family member, are we really going to do this to hit a family member, somebody who's close to us, a dear friend, or a family member, somebody that we really love? Some people would say a family member depends. Some people love their family members, but let's assume family members are people that we care about and want to see. It's very interesting to see what would happen if we describe the people in a different way, right? So there's all kinds of things. Here's the twist that relates to a different factor over there. So we talked about varying the person. What's happening here? Here, instead of a lever, there's this bridge, and somehow you're standing on this bridge with another person. And the only way to stop the trolley is to do what? Push the person. So you're taking action not just by pulling a lever, but you're pushing the person off the bridge. Supposedly, you're able to make it land just on the tracks in a way that will stop the trolley and prevent it from hitting the five people. What would happen then? What would people say about this one as compared to the first one? Yeah, so say more about that. What makes it more? Why is it more than a lever? What's the difference between pulling this and pulling a person? Right, so maybe there's a psychological distance. Maybe the other person is not aware. Here, the person is going to be very aware of you pushing it, right? So physical contact, awareness, right? All kinds of things that come into play. What's another thing that might come into play here? What other thing might prevent a person from pushing a person off the bridge as compared to pulling a lever? So maybe there's a social aspect of how would other people judge me, including these five people. They see me doing something over there. Now, everybody's going to be aware that this is happening and that I did this, I caused this. Very, very good. What else is in this situation that makes it even more complicated? It's also in the first one, but here it's even more. You may also fall off the bridge. Okay, so there's some risks involved. Maybe before you were just standing over there pulling a lever. Here, maybe the person will fight back. Maybe you will fall together with them. All kinds of complications. The person doesn't want to be pushed, right? He's very aware of the situation. Very good. Taking your point a little bit further, what else can happen here instead of pushing the person? You can sacrifice yourself, right? You can jump off of the bridge in order to put yourself at risk and stop the trolley, right? So why is it that you're deciding that you're going to sacrifice somebody else when you can sacrifice yourself? So if you answered for the first one, definitely pull the lever. It was more than half of you. Now consider this situation. So in this classroom, how many of you would push the person to fall off the bridge in order to lie on the track and stop the trolley? Raise your hand. None of you? Okay. How many of you would say absolutely not, I will not do this? Yeah, many of you? Okay. So suddenly you can see there's a big shift in this. So if you would not sacrifice another person, how many of you would sacrifice yourself in order to jump off the bridge? Very few. We're not the subway hero, right? Subway hero might have done that. He has the instinct. He's a veteran. He's been trained to do this kind of thing. He would put himself at risk. I don't know what's going to happen with his two kids, but something is going to happen. This is a sacrifice that sometimes soldiers are asked to do. Consider this as something inherent in their job. Good. So we have these two paradigms, and then there's the question: is would you sacrifice yourself in order to do this? So people have been playing with this for a very, very long time, and I'm going to try and show you just how far this can go. Okay, so first I'll show you just how people play with this. Here's a classic dilemma, a driving test. See how you would answer this.
For the last part of your driving test, you see an old man and a young kid. What do you hit?
What would you hit?
The old man? Well, I mean, the kid has his whole life ahead of him, so I would hit the old man.
So this is a little bit like with a baby, right? So there's an old man and there's a baby, a kid. And he says, yeah, I'll hit the old man. What do you think about this? How is this as an answer? Why are you all smiling? There's a catch here. So what's the right answer? Yeah, very good. So you've seen this, it's a meme, right? Been there for a very long time.
Right?
The brakes. You'd hit the brakes.
Okay, very good. So moral dilemmas, sometimes it's like very obvious that this is not a trolley dilemma. There's a way for you not to get anybody hurt in this kind of thing.
For the last.
And then actually I looked for a very long time for a technical solution. How many of you know this, the technical solution to, so it turns out that there's a way to solve the trolley dilemma. Did you know this? Yeah, so I'll show you. So it seems like people have really taken this very far. It's a meme. People use this for all kinds of things. Then you've got all kinds of websites that do things like an absurd. You've got the Mona Lisa versus the what would you do? So you can go and play with these things, and you can see just how many people use each one of the options. Let's just do the first one. We see, oh no, trolley is heading towards 5 people. What would you do? Pull, deliver, or do nothing? So as a classroom, we would say that we pull, deliver, and then you can see what happens at the end. 73%, which is very close to what happened here in the classroom. 73% agree with you, 27% disagree. And you can see that this is a very popular website and it keeps going on. But actually, I'll show you an even more popular website after this. Then you can keep going and it becomes more and more absurd about, so instead of the 1, now there's the 4, so you have a little bit more. So let's say that even here, if we're utilitarian, then we'll still pull the lever. If you would do this, then it drops from 73 to 68. And then you can just like keep going with this. Would you sacrifice all of your wealth in order to save the 5 people? What would we say? Let's just vote. How many of you would pull the lever, sacrifice your personal wealth? Yeah, okay, let's say that we're the majority, okay. Pull the lever is a majority, so pull the wealth. How many of you would say? 58, so it keeps dropping, right? Then you can just keep going with this again and again. Here's the U, right? So I think based on the previous scenario, we said we do nothing. 62% agree with us on this. Then we've got the Mona Lisa. Would you sacrifice the Mona Lisa? Yeah, that's for sacrifice the Mona Lisa for this. 74%. And it just keeps on going. We talked about social status, right? Rich man. But here it's not just the rich man. He offers you money. So you get $500,000. So it's kind of like a Squid Games sort of things. So you can play with this. I'm not going to go into this much further. There's also lots of cartoons about this. So for example, we have the hero. He's the trolley man hero. And he can save whatever's happening. In order to activate his powers, he needs to kill a person. And people are like, definitely not. All right. So all this started from Philippa Foot. She was talking about a real dilemma. So she's a philosopher, the one who started this whole thing. And this really had some consequences back in the 1960s, where people were discussing this, whether if some people need transplant in the hospital, whether we should kill one of the other patients that came to the hospital in order to take the organs and save these 5 people. This seems something absurd to us. It seems something that's almost impossible. How can this be immoral? But this is something that philosophers said, we don't have a paradigm for this, so we must invent something like the trolley dilemma in order to understand a person's life. 5 persons, if we do nothing, then 5 people will die. But if we kill that person and harvest his organs, then we are able to save those 5. So what kind of a society do we want to live in? What kind of decisions should we make? And back then in the 1960s, we didn't know if this is going to come into play or not. But actually very recently, this became a real dilemma for us. So what kind of situation can you think about that we faced recently that had something very similar to this? COVID-19, can you say a little bit more? Like what's the similarity? Right, we forgot about this. We just had a pandemic. I don't know, life goes on. Barely remember what goes on, but in the first round, what happened at the beginning was that the elderly were the first to be affected very, very severely by the COVID-19. The rest of us, because there was no Omicron, it was just the first version, the alpha and the beta. The people who were most affected with this were the elderly. And then the elderly came to the hospital and they got the ventilators. But the hospital has a very limited number of ventilators, right? But then came all these variants, and the variants affected all of us, and they affected the kids, the children. And then they started coming into the hospital. And the question was, are you going to disconnect the elderly from the ventilators to connect the children, connect the babies? Very, very difficult decision. And the doctors and the nurses, and generally the government and the policy, we didn't have good tools in order to make these kinds of decisions. What would you do if you're a nurse or a doctor? Another aspect here, and maybe this is why some of you might hesitate to raise your hand to these questions about trolley dilemma, is what do we think about a person once we know what they would do in a trolley dilemma. So if we have this hypothetical, and then we ask people in the classroom, and somebody raised their hand to say either utilitarian or deontologist. So some people would say full deliver, some people would say not full deliver, and then some people don't think about just sharing something in classroom. But it could very well be that others are looking at what is it that we answered, and they're making some kind of an evaluation, whether we're trustworthy, whether they want to be our friends, whether they want to date us, right? So all kinds of social aspects come into things when we vote like this in the classroom, right? So what's interesting about this, and this is the first paper that I want to show you about this, is that we have two teams. Yeah, we have two teams on the left and on the right. This is a little bit unusual, but both of them are in Journal of Experimental Psychology Journal. And both of them had the same research idea at the same time. They both finished their projects at the same time, and they both submitted to the same journal at the same time without knowing about one another. It's very, very interesting. It could be that they were discussed in some conference and there was something that initiated this, but they did separate studies, not knowing. These folks are from Belgium and university, and these people are from the US and the UK. And what the journal decided at the end to do, usually what they would do is that they would favor one and then reject the other. But first, they accepted this article to the journal, and then they asked these folks to rephrase this to be a replication. So you can see a replication study, even though it has nothing to do for a replication. They both did this separately. And basically, they were trying to understand, who do we trust more? The people that would say that they would full deliver, and people would say we will not full deliver, which is already a very interesting aspect. So we started from, what do people do? And then we go into the social aspect, the social psychology of, what do we think about people who full or don't full deliver, right? So you can see over here from their abstracts, so they did 5 studies on the left. We show that people who make deontological judgments are preferred as social partners. So utilitarians are the ones who say full deliver, I prefer the one over the 5. Deontologists say, we have a different set of moral rules, and one of the moral rules is do no harm. So I don't want to be responsible for. So actually, in these 5 studies, on the folks on the left, they said, we prefer the people who are deontologists, not utilitarians. We want our partners, our friends, our social connections to be with people who are deontologists. Very interesting. Would this replicate? So here's the replication study. Overall, the present studies clearly confirm the main findings, same findings, that deontologists are more trusted than utilitarians in social dilemma game. Very, very interesting. But it seemed a little bit strange at first. Why is it that deontologists are preferred? To what extent? And then we have a whole other layer of, when does this hold true? So you can look at a main effect. You can say, okay, in general, on average, people prefer deontologists over utilitarian. But does this always hold? Under what circumstances? If we change the context, will it be a different answer? And this is where this guy here, Prasad, who has worked with us, with HKU students, has published a lot with the previous people in the course that you took. So he's a person who I know very well. He did his PhD in the same university that I did. He came in and said, I don't understand what's going on here because I think things would go differently. So he really did a replication study, but he did this as something called a registered report. We can see it here, a registered report in a journal called Scientific Reports. And what the difference is between a registered report and a usual study is that in these studies, in these ones here, they conduct all of the 5 studies. They do the data collection, they do the analysis, and then they write this up, and then they submit this to the journal. So actually, we don't know how they made the different decisions. We have no impact on their decisions. We don't know what led them to do the studies in a certain way. In a registered report, something else happens. What you do is you write a pre-registration, and a pre-registration is a plan before data collection. You lay out all of your arguments, the hypothesis, the research question, the hypothesis, the analyses, the planned analyses. Then you take the pre-registration plan and you submit this to the journal. You still have no data. You just have a plan. You submit this to the journal, and the journal gives you feedback on whether this is the best plan or not. If it's not the best plan, then they give you feedback on how to improve, and then you improve it. So you plan in advance the best plan that you possibly can with the authors, the reviewers, and the editor. And once everybody agrees on that plan, then they issue what's called an in-principle acceptance, which means that no matter what the outcome is, if it's p-value higher than 0.05 or lower than 0.05, supported, not supported, everything is going to be accepted for publication. So there is no publication bias. We'll talk about this in the next session. But this is just to say the registered reports have a higher rigor, higher standard, higher transparency and openness about the way that they do things. So they did this as a registered report. And you can see that Prasad over here teamed with Dries and Arnie. So these are the same Dries and Arnie here. And told them, I want to run a replication, but I have a feeling something different is going to happen. Will you join me? So they joined, they teamed up together, they submitted this as a registry report, and to their surprise, some of Prassad's hypotheses really came into play, where they said it's actually not that everybody always prefers odontologists, but it depends on whether you're a odontologist or not. If you're a odontologist, you would prefer odontologist. If you're a utilitarian, you would prefer utilitarian, right? So this is where you have this kind of interaction between those things. So I like it that we started from a very simple question of what would most people do. Then we went into the question of what do we think other people, what do we think of other people who would do these kinds of things. And then we started off from one idea that was published here back in the 2019, I think. And then later on, people followed up on this and then they clarified this and turns out with a registry report involving the people that were doing the first round. So this is a more complicated story. I like the evolution of this. Any questions about this, about the different levels, about everything that we looked at so far? Clear? Yeah, pretty straightforward, right? All right. So here comes an interesting question. And when do we judge people for doing something? And here comes, like when I gave this last year, I really didn't think Trump is going to come back into politics, but now suddenly he's again the president of the United States. Completely unbelievable. 2018, he was president and there was a shooting in Florida. You know, all these headlines about what happened over there. I don't know why the US is an insane place where every month, sometimes even more than that, somebody goes into a school or a cinema or a shopping mall and starts shooting at people. It's a big problem over there. Luckily, we don't have it that often here in this region. But what happened over there is that even the people who are in charge of the security in the school did not rush into the school in order to address the shooter. So the shooter was just going around shooting at everybody. And I want to show you a clip of how Donald Trump, as the president, reacted to the security people not going and not intervening. And as you listen to Donald Trump, I want you to think about what he's saying. Pay attention to each and every detail about the argument that he's making. And I want you to put your scientist hat on. I want you to think as scientists. And I want us all together to come up with some way of empirically testing with an experiment what Donald Trump is arguing. Okay? Right. So what did he say?
You know, I got to watch some deputy sheriffs performing this weekend. They weren't exactly Medal of Honor winners, all right? The way they performed was, frankly, disgusting. They were listening to what was going on. The one in particular, he was early. Then you had three others that probably a similar deal a little bit later, but a similar kind of a thing. You know, I really believe you don't know until you test it.
Don't know it until you test it. What don't you know?
But I think I really believe I'd run in there even if I didn't have a weapon. And I think most of the people in this room would have done that too, because I know most of you. But the way they performed was really a disgrace.
Yeah, so this is really interesting. It presents us with some kind of research question about how do we know how people would react in real situations? So up until now, we did this trolley dilemma. Hypothetical. I showed you a scenario, a nice drawing, and then I said, if you're the person in the lever, if you're the person on the bridge, then what would you do? And some of you were able to make a calculation in your head and then tell me, I would do X or I would not do X, right? That kind of thing. But now we have a situation where there's an argument where somebody who's very important is judging other people, saying other people behave disgracefully, disgusting. No? But then he says, I really believe it. You don't know it until you test it. But I really believe it that if I was in that situation, not hypothetical, but real, then I would rush in to try and save it, even if I don't have a weapon. And then he goes even further than this. And then he says, not only do I know this about myself, but I know this about all of you. I know you. I know that you would do exactly the same thing. So my question to you is, aside from him saying this, how would we test this? What would be a good way to test this to really make sure that if Donald Trump is facing this kind of situation, that he would really rush in, even if he didn't have a weapon? What would be a good way to test this? Why setting up a shooting in real life and getting Donald Trump with an issue? How would we do this? Morality? Yeah, let's talk about morality. What can you say more? What is morality? Yeah, we have a moral problem. Let's say even if we can learn a lot from this about the nature of morality or even about Donald Trump or about the situation, we don't want to sacrifice children in order to get to that knowledge, right? Very good. morality. I think in most places we also sometimes confuse or conflate morality and ethics. So we in the university have an ethics board. We need to pass the ethics board, ethics review. If you're doing a thesis, then you need to submit an ethics request in order to ask for something like this. What would happen if I would submit that kind of paradigm to the ethics review committee? I think I would be in very serious problem. Not only would this be rejected, but somebody might look into how insane I am, right? So there's obviously an issue here. But let's say that we want to do something, an experiment, that would be a little bit more moral, that would pass the ethics review committee. What else can we think about? What else can we do? Is there a way to solve this? What's the closest that we can get in order to test this kind of thing? I like this idea very much because it gets to another issue that we need to face when we're doing research. Also relates to ethics, and this is the question of deception, right? Using deception. So everybody is going to be in on it, aside from the participant, in this case, Trump. Trump is going to come to the school nearby, and he's going to feel like everything is real, like things are really under threat, the children are being killed, and he's the only person that can come in and save. But what he doesn't know is that this is all a setup, right? So nobody gets hurt in the process. Very good. So we eliminated the moral problem of people actually dying. And now we have a different dilemma, and this is the dilemma of deception, right? So would this be a viable solution to this? Is it okay for us to do this kind of thing? Very good idea. Let's discuss this. Is this a good solution to this, for us to test Donald Trump in this situation? What could go wrong? What is the problem with deception? Mental trauma. Can you say more about that? Good. They already mentioned the solution, the ethics solution debrief. Can you just say what a debrief is? How would you frame it, explain it? Right, very good. So when we do ethics requests, so if you're doing a thesis or internship and you need to submit a request, and they ask you for a bunch of things, one of them is debriefing, especially if you have deception. Debriefing is very, very important because you need to know that actually we're not involved in doing any harm, or that if you have something that might have trauma, that actually the situation was not real. So debrief is one important element. Another important element is informed consent. Is for you to say, I'm willing to partake in a situation. You don't know exactly what the deception is going to be, but you were willing to be a participant in some kind of an experiment that involves deception, right? You're supposed to be able to walk into this, and then it's a question, how do you do the deception in a way where the deception would still be convincing? So debriefing-wise, do you think in this case the debriefing would be enough? So let's say Donald Trump faced the situation, he did or did not do something, and then we debrief. Is that good enough? You're shaking your head, or, oh, why is it not good enough? Let's say he gave consent, because let's say here he gave consent, and let's say that afterwards we debrief him. Is this going to be good enough? Did we come to a solution of how we're going to test this? Some of you are doing this. No, why not? You want to say something? Why not? Right, there's still trauma involved. So the fact that people rationally process, cognitively say, okay, this was all fake, but then they know something about themselves that they didn't know before. And having gone through the process of thinking that everything is real, the trauma does not suddenly disappear. So sometimes in the debriefing, what we offer participants is, it's a very, very cheap way to get out of this, but we do this in ethics. We give them a number. If you have mental trauma, please call our counselors at setters or something. Here's a number that you can call if you experience trauma. But this gets a little bit closer to a solution, but is this really a solution? So sometimes, because things are so stressful, sometimes we say, we're not going to do this kind of research, right? But here I'm going to show you how people actually did do this research. And this was very surprising because 10 years ago, I didn't think this was possible. But now I've seen a few examples where this is possible. And then I want you to reflect together with me about how good this solution is, okay? So here's one solution. How do we address this with an ethical concern? How do we study something like a trolley dilemma in real life without having to face all the problems with trauma and ethics considerations? So here's a paper, again by Dries, the same Dries from before. So Dries seems to be very much involved with the trolley dilemma, and he was thinking for a very long time, also when he was visiting here. He was thinking, what can I do in order to see whether people, if they answer something in hypothetical scenarios, whether they do something like that in real life? And this is what he came up with, of mice, men, and trolleys. Why mice? Because you can do this with mice. He says humans, too much of a trauma. Mice may be acceptable because we do a lot of things to mice, right? So what did he do? First week, got in all the participants and asked them, just like I asked you here, what would you do? Would you pull the lever or not pull the lever? And then people answered a certain way, and then he let them go. A week later, came in, but this time they were facing a dilemma. What was happening? They came into a room where there was a cage with 5 mice and a countdown of 10 seconds. And the countdown and the dilemma was, if you do nothing, these 5 mice are going to die. But if you push this button, only the one mouse here on the left is going to die. Choose quickly, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. And then what happens at the end? Deception. No mice were killed in the process, right? Ethics committee was willing to do this on mice and not willing to do this with people, right? So deception could be a good situation, a good solution for this. But with humans, the trauma of having to go through this might be too severe. So the ethics committee said, if you're doing this with mice, it's okay. And then debriefing, okay, so I was the one who decided to kill 5 mice or not to do anything, kill the one. People can live with it. The trauma, the burden is maybe not as severe, but still you have to argue for it. So it would be interesting for you if you're doing something similar, you're doing deception, to write Dries and say, hey, Dries, I heard about the study that you're doing. Can you please share this with me? And the interesting thing is the main finding here. What was the main finding? He said people say one thing. In the first week they said one thing, but when it actually came to the situation, they did not follow up on this. So the correlation was not as high as we were hoping. It's definitely not 100%. So hypothetically, we can do all kinds of things. When it comes to the real life, when there's situation where you're under pressure, when you need to react, then things happen very, very differently. What are your impressions of this? Any thoughts about this? Interesting way to resolve this, yeah? Debatable, yeah, in what way? Let's create a debate. What do you want to debate? Right. Yeah, good. Do you have a title for the concern that you have? Maybe generalizability, so how generalizable this is, how applicable this is, how much does this really simulate real life? And the first things that we answered about trolleys were about humans, and now you're talking about mice. Is this really the same? Can you really say something about this? So you came very, very close to testing the trolley dilemma in real life, but it's still mice. Come on, maybe the other person would react exactly as he said if these were humans, right? But we still don't know. Actually, it's very good that you mentioned debate, because look at all these people that felt very strongly against this paper and came out with all these debates. And he came to HKU talking to us exactly when all these things came out. And actually, I know many of these people. We collaborated with them, HKU students, published with some of these folks. So all these people are people that I know when I come back and talk about Joshua Green. So these are people who study morality, and they were not happy about this. Lots of the things that you said, overlooked evidence. What is the right question? How do you compare hypothetical to real life? People were not pleased with it. But I think this is what scientific debate is about. We don't get 100% to the truth, but we make very slow progress. So he needed to reply to this, and then he replied. So he evaluated all of their replies, and then he wrote a rebuttal, a response to this. And it's still an ongoing debate, and this is what I love about science, right? So even if you found something, you can look into a moderator, or you can find something, and then people can say, well, is this generalized or not? Is this really applicable or not? Does this say what it is that you think that it says? And then you have a chance to respond to this. And many times we did stuff. I did stuff with HKU students. We did replications. We found certain things, and then they wrote back a criticism or not, and then we wrote back a reply to the criticism. This is how science advances over time. So this is a very interesting thing about the way that we think about the evolution of the trolley dilemma. And I really like the research that Dries is doing, very much related to what it is that we do, and some of my collaborators and co-authors. Very good. For a very long time, I thought this is the best that we're going to have, but then came in a real trolley dilemma with humans. Who is going to do the trolley dilemma with humans? As usually is with this kind of thing, and it's going to happen for us again and again throughout the semester. Who is going to do this? A TV show is going to do this. So Squid Games, put it like that sometimes. Just finished the second season. Oh my gosh, what's happening over there? Just horrible. But a lot of trolley dilemmas over there. A lot of who are you going to save? How many people? Who are you going to prefer? Somebody you know, somebody you don't know. A lot of stuff. It's mind-blowing. Somebody needs to analyze this scientific evidence. But then it seems like a TV show came out with it. So I'm going to show this to you. It's going to be about like 5-7 minutes, and we'll discuss this, and then we'll take a break. First, I'll show you the setup. how did they do this? And actually, they did involve a psychologist, and they were able somehow, I don't know how, to get this to an ethics committee. So you'll see the setup, and then of all the participants, I recommend that you go and watch all of them, but I chose one in particular, and then we'll talk about the consequences of what it means to do research like this, okay? So they don't have a large sample. They only did this on, I think, 10 participants, but I chose one. First, the setup, okay?
This is where we're going to physically create the trolley problem in real life. Not with a trolley, but with a train. Our subjects will sign in at this booth for our phony focus test, which will never actually take place. It's gonna be a hot day for them. So we'll offer them, while they wait for the actual test to begin, the chance to sit inside this nice air-conditioned remote switching station. Inside, they'll meet a kindly train switch operator, supposedly an employee of the California Railroad Authority. The California Railroad Authority is real. Real fake. We invented this non-existent government organization to convince our subjects that everything here is real, including these monitors showing supposedly live shots of actual trains from different tracks all around the California area. While the participant is waiting inside this room, they'll learn how the operator switches the tracks using a lever to remotely switch a train from one track to another. They'll see it happen. We're actually controlling the video on these screens from a different hidden control room. At a given time, the switch operator will leave the subject alone in the switching station. And at that point, a crisis will occur. Train will be barreling down the tracks, and workers will have made their way out to both tracks, 5 on one worker on his phone on the other. No one is around for them to alert who has any kind of control or authority. Switching the train is up to the subject alone. They'll feel like what they do has real-world consequences. Will 5 people die, or will 1?
Wow, intense. What's going to happen? How will people react to this? So this is as close as we can get to what some of our fellow students described, getting Trump into a situation where he really thinks everything is real. So here, they will have no clue that this is a setup. They really think they get consent. They didn't know that they're consenting to this. They thought they're going to participate in something different. And now we have deception, and now they're going to partake in this. So I'm going to jump to one of the participants.
It is quite the test. At this point, one subject had switched the tracks and 5 others had not. But we weren't done yet. Meet Corey.
Here, have a seat.
Much obliged, thank you. This is cool.
This whole module will interconnect with the entire nation if we wanted it to.
Right.
You know, but right now we're looking at just track 1 on the left, track 2 through there. These are many, many miles away.
Yeah.
But they're all live feeds.
Surveying the scene, Eagle's point of view.
Yeah. Let me see what this is. Okay, I'll be right back.
Okay, got it.
He's remaining engaged.
Here come the workers.
Oh, no.
Attention, object on track.
Yeah.
So he realizes there's a potential problem.
I think he's gonna go out.
Attention, train approaching.
There's a train coming.
Okay.
Attention, object on track.
Yeah.
Attention, train approaching.
Okay, he realizes there's no one there. It's urgent.
Okay, so it needs to go to...
Object on track.
Okay, he's rehearsing what to do.
Track, attention.
Track 2. Do they not know?
Attention, train approaching.
I know, they should see this.
Object on track. Attention, train approaching. Attention, object on track. Attention, object on track.
Yeah.
End of test.
Okay, good.
Everyone is safe.
Hello?
Hi, Corey.
Hey.
My name's Michael.
There was just almost an accident, seemingly.
Corey, everything that just happened was an experiment.
Okay.
No one was in danger.
For sure.
These were just loops of video taken before. This is a psychology experiment looking at how people behave in various circumstances.
Okay, yeah.
So tell me how you were feeling.
Mainly a bunch of terror and responsibility because I was at the helm, and just horrified about making a decision between like 5 people compared to 1. It was very scary to say the least.
It was scary,
yeah,
right.
Oh, yeah.
What was going through your mind as the train's coming down the track?
It was mainly to warn them.
They're just
What's coming up right now?
You don't have to choose between people.
Right.
And that was really tough. either like 6 families or 1 family. It was like, up to me, it felt like, yeah.
Yeah, it makes me emotional every time I watch it. Difficult to watch, right? We were not the ones making the decision, but just seeing his reaction. He is never going to forget this. He's never going to forget. It doesn't matter how much they debrief him. He gets to meet everybody afterwards and shake hands and smile and all this. But he's going to go home knowing exactly how he responded to this. They got ethical. After this came out, all the psychologists were like, holy shit, what's happening here? This is really, really bad. And some questions were raised about how this ethics happened. But like you said, definitely, it's going to be trauma. It's going to need counseling. It's going to need more than that. We put a person in a situation where he needs to go through this terror, this horror. He had no idea that this was a deception, right? So we need to consider these things. We need to think about the consequences of what we do in social psychology experiments. We're discussing this. This is fun. This is class. This is no problem. But I'm very much aware of the impact of what this might do for myself, what it might do for you. When we're talking about a girl drowning in a pond, whether we're going to save Wang Ye, or we're going to, all the things that we're discussing, when we talk about morality, this also has an impact on us. When we vote on this in class, it has an impact on us. And then we need to go home and then we contemplate, what did we just say in class? What would we do? What is the impact of this? But I think it's important for us to put ourselves in this situation. It's important for us to see this kind of reaction in order to really contemplate what are the consequences of what is it that we say, we do, we think, putting ourselves in this situation, discussing this. What does it mean to be a social psychologist, a moral psychologist? Right? We're going to have a lot of these things throughout the semester. We're going to discuss charities, how to save the world, how to help people, how to lift people so that they maximize flourishing, minimize pain and suffering. But these are difficult decisions. I feel like it's important that we put ourselves in this for this class, but I'm very much aware that this might have carry weight. This would be a burden for you. I don't want to overburden you all too much, but I do want you to think about these things. Okay? I'll give you a 5-minute break. Go refresh yourself, come back, and then I'll show you one of the biggest experiments ever conducted in psychology and why this is important, not just to the hypothetical, but also important for what we're doing right now. 5 minutes. I just want to, before we continue to show you the biggest experiment ever conducted in psychology, I just want to discuss one last point with you because I feel like by the end of your studies and when you get into industry, nonprofit, government, your next stage, this is going to become a reality. This is changing everything. A year and a half ago, this was science fiction. But the revolution of AI is coming and it's going to change everything, also about the way that we do research. It might even replace me at some point. It's getting very close to that. I don't know if you've seen the 3.0, the 03, the last models, but it's unbelievable what they can do. A lot of things that have taken me years to do, coding, looking at things, summarizing things. The stuff that AI can do now is unbelievable. And it's going to change the way that our society is going to work. I'm just going to discuss with you one last option for how would we know how Trump would react in this kind of situation. So here's a paper. This is from a year and a half ago. Some people that I know and familiar, but this was a year and a half ago. It was only 3.5. ChatGPT now is a lot smarter than that, like by scale, a lot smarter. But already with 3.5, what they did was very, very clever. They first asked people to report all their demographics and a bunch of things like traits, values, all the psychological factors. And then later, they gave them a list of all the possible morality, I think 464 different moral dilemmas, including trolleys and all of that. And then they wanted to see what is the correlation between different characters. But when ChatGPT came out, 3.5, they went to ChatGPT and gave it the following prompt. Assume that you're a person with these demographics. You're this and this and this and this, and you answer that and that and that on all bunch of scales. Assuming that you're this, how would you answer this moral dilemma? Simulate the person. Answer it as if you're the person. And then they looked at what the result was that the ChatGPT 3.5 said for that person. And they did this for a bunch of simulated participants. And then they looked at the correlation between what ChatGPT simulated participants said and what the actual participants said. What is the correlation? 95% correlation. This is unbelievable. So this means that ChatGPT 3.5, not even the smart version, was able to simulate participants. So if I give them some of your characteristics and some of the things that you answered on your scales and demographics, and then I give them moral dilemma, maybe then I will know how you would answer this. Unbelievable. So in order to answer the Trump question, I would feed ChatGPT everything I know about Trump, study the person, everything that he has ever been on, everything that he's, and then say, if you were in a Florida shooting, faced with this kind of situation, would you go in? And then I would see, and this would be kind of a proxy, 95% proxy for what Donald Trump does or doesn't do. So a lot of research coming up on this. It's really amazing to see some of these correlations and what's happening. This is from this week. It just came out from that. A very large summary of everything that's done. The synthetic participants created by GPT-4, a form of LLM, an average produced responses reasonably similar to those of human counterparts, especially when it comes to English-speaking and American participants compared to other places in the world. So it seems like, and some of the people that I know actually run this, so you can consider this. I don't know what you're doing your thesis on, but if it's something related to social psychology, at least as a pretest, before you go in and you collect participants, now you have a bunch of websites that would simulate participants for you. You upload your qual checks, and then you say, please simulate 1,000 participants based on a representative sample of Americans. And they will give you participants, and it will cost you something, I don't know, like $5. But before you go into your thesis and collect real data, at least have a look and see what the simulated participants would say. That's something to consider. So now we can rule out a lot of pretests about things that wouldn't work. So if I run, I don't have this year, but if I have 50 students, then one of the first steps I would do is like, yeah, let's just simulate some participants, see what happens. It might save us a lot of money or capture some of the problems on the way for us to improve. So this is a real trend. It's going to happen. If you're going to work in industry, let's say marketing, finance, whatever that is, this would be a good way for you to get some insights. Before going in and doing all, I don't know, focus groups, all the expensive stuff with surveys, you can simulate some participants. It's getting better and better all the time. Not 100%, probably will never be 100%. It goes up, it goes down, depending on context. I guess if you do this in a Chinese context, I haven't used DeepSeek or anything like that. I don't know if that is good or not good. But know that this is coming. Something is going to happen, and you're going to be the ones that are going to face this. It's going to have the biggest impact on you and your lives. All right, so who cares? Why do we care about trolley dilemmas? Why is this a big thing? Why do we need to talk about these things? Because for a very long time, we thought that this is hypothetical. We thought maybe a Florida shooting. We want to know what somebody would do in a Florida shooting. But now we have a problem because we have these self-driving autonomous vehicles. When I was in California just earlier last year, I went, Waymo was just like roaming the streets, no driver whatsoever. This Waymo, it's a little bit like Uber. If you want to go from one place to another, comes in, there's no driver, you hop in, it takes you to the destination. It's unbelievable. We have millions of hours of driven cars, and this is just expanding all the time. Some parts of China have this with trucks, but still not like a Waymo, but it's happening very fast. Some parts of Germany, Western Germany, they're piloting this kind of thing. So somebody is making this decision about what kind of decision would an autonomous, self-driving autonomous vehicle would make if faced with hitting the one person or hitting the five. Should I deviate? Should I not deviate? Should I kill the passengers inside the car? Should I kill the pedestrians in front of the car? We think this is a hypothetical, but now in the last 10 years, we realize this hypothetical social psychology, morality, this is happening. Do we want a Google developer or a Tesla developer or a Waymo developer to decide these things for us? Or should we know, as a society, should we make a decision about where do we want to go with this? What should the car do? How should we program the car? And what should happen? So very much something that is going to affect our future. In 10 years, I think this is going to be very common, definitely in places like Silicon Valley, perhaps also China in the region. So we understood that doing one experiment here, one experiment there, is not going to solve the issue. We need to come to some kind of a solution where we can test millions of different paradigms, all kinds of possibilities, 1 versus 5, 4 versus 5, rich person, not rich, and all this kind of thing. And this is where MIT folks, collaboration of social psychology, MIT set up a website called The Moral Machine. How many of you have heard of this, Moral Machine? Nobody? Good. So you'll see this now. A paper came out 2018 that changed everything. Social psychology don't get to publish in Nature very often. Nature and Science are the top journals in terms of impact and reputation. But they did. So it's a combination of computing and social psychology and philosophy. And they set up this Moral Machine website and published this in Nature. Since 2018, this has been running for about 7 years. So now they have a lot more. You'll see what they summarized in the 2018, but now we've got like hundreds of millions of people from around the world doing these kind of things. What is the Moral Machine? I'll show you a video of them explaining this.
Who would you save? The pedestrian in the road or the drivers in the car? It's not easy, and yet that's the kind of decision which millions of autonomous cars would have to make in the near future. We program the machine, but who do we tell it to save? That is the setup of the Moral Machine experiment.
There are so many moral decisions that we usually make during the day we don't realize. In driverless cars, these decisions will have to be implemented ahead of time. The goal was to open this discussion to the public.
Some decisions might seem simple. Should the car save a family of 4 or a cat? But what about a homeless person and their dog instead of a businessman? Or how about 2 athletes and an old woman instead of 2 school children?
The problem was that there were so many combinations, so many possible accidents, that it seemed impossible to investigate them all using classic social science methods.
Not only that, but how do people's culture and background affect the decisions that they make?
The only option we had really was to turn it into a viral website. Of course, it's easier said than done, right?
But that is exactly what the team managed to do. They turned these situations into an online task that people across the globe wanted to share and take part in. They gathered almost 40 million moral decisions taken from millions of online participants across 233 countries and territories from all around the world. The results are intriguing. First, there are 3 fundamental principles which hold true across the world.
The main results of the paper for me are first the big 3 in people's preferences, which is save human, save the greater number, save the kids. And the second most interesting finding was the clusters, the clusters of countries with different moral profiles.
The first cluster included many Western countries. The second cluster had many Eastern countries. And the third cluster had countries from Latin America and also from former French colonies.
The cultural difference we find are sometimes hard to describe because they're multidimensional, but some of them are very striking, like the fact that Eastern countries do not have such a strong preference for saving young lives. Eastern countries seem to be more respectful of older people, which I thought was a very interesting finding.
And it wasn't just age. One cluster showed an unexpectedly strong preference for saving women over men.
I was also struck by the fact that French and the French subcluster was so interested in saving women. That was, I'm still not quite sure what's going on here.
Another surprising finding concerned people's social status.
On one side, we put male and female executives, and other side, we put a homeless person. The higher the economic inequality in a country, the more people were willing to spare the executives at the cost of the homeless people.
This work provides new insight into how morals change across cultures, and the team see particular relevance to the field of artificial intelligence and autonomous vehicles.
In the grand scheme of it, I think these results are going to be very important to align artificial intelligence to human values. We sometimes change our mind. Other people next to us don't think the same thing we do. Other countries don't think the same things we do. So aligning AI and human moral value is only possible if we do understand these differences, and that's what we try to do. I so much hope that we can converge, that we avoid a future where you have to learn about the new ethical setting of your car every time you cross a border.
Yeah, it's a very interesting insight. Right now, if we cross a border, maybe it's on driving on the left or driving on the right. It's not big implications. You can adjust to this, but can you just imagine crossing the border and suddenly the car, the self-driving autonomous vehicle, does things that are completely against your values. You need to first understand what they're doing and then understand the implications. So just to very briefly to show you, I strongly recommend that you play with this. You can do 2 things. You can participate in what other people are doing, or you can form your own experiment. If there's something that you're curious about, you can set up your own experiment, and after a bunch of, a few weeks, a bunch of people are going to answer this by the tens of thousands sometimes, depending on how interesting this is. You've got interfaces in most of the big languages, including Chinese, Korean, we've got all kinds. This is Chinese, this is Japanese. Okay, so English, just to show you how this is, you can start judging, or you can design your own. So if you design your own, you can play with a bunch of things. So for example, here you can decide if you want pedestrians versus pedestrians or pedestrians versus passengers, whether the pedestrians have green light or red light, so whether they're violating a law, whether they're criminals, or whether there's a traffic light at all. So if there's no traffic light, and then you can see, there's a baby, or there's a criminal and elderly. You've got like a bunch of things, so you can just like add generally to see what's happening, and it will add things to that. And you can see with these calls is that who is going to get killed? Is it going to be them that's going to get killed, or is it going to be the pedestrians by deviating and hitting this wall over here? So you can say, are they going to be killed in the outcome, injured in the outcome, uncertain in this outcome? So You also have a level of risk or uncertainty about this. So let's say, for example, injured in the outcome. And then you can submit the scenario, and you can call this a certain thing, and then you can see the descriptions, and then you can see how people comment on this. So there's just a lot of things that you can do with this. It's really endless. And if you want, you can just like browse things and see how people reacted so far. You can judge on things. So for example, who are you going to hit here? That kind of thing. So this is very interesting. Just to look at the Nature paper that came out in 2018, these are the clusters. So you can see generally it's sparing humans, sparing more, sparing the young, sparing higher. So you've got like the different dimensions, and then you've got the Western cluster, the Eastern cluster, and the Southern cluster, and you can see how they change from one another. So for example, sparing the young seems to be very much a Southern and Western thing, but sparing the young does not seem to be an Eastern thing. So you can have a look at this and see what is interesting for you. So cultural differences are already something that we need to pay attention to, but I want to focus more on this. So these are the different dimensions of different preferences. So it seems like when we have sparing pets versus sparing humans, people by far prefer sparing humans over pets. We've got more characters and fewer characters. People prefer the more characters. And you can see just generally overall as a main effect, what is it that people emphasize? I don't know what this is, but just like I said, women a little bit more overall, not just in the French colony cluster, sparing pedestrians versus sparing the passengers. So really interesting to see how they came into this. And when we're talking about an aggregation of tens of millions, 40 million of these things, then these have real implications. I want you to look at this. So we were talking about babies and elderly and all this. So this is the general hierarchy of who is saved more. We talked about some of these. Have a look at this and tell me if you see something that's interesting to you, something that's strange to you, something that's funny to you. What is it that you notice in this hierarchy? Yes, please. Criminal is lower than dog. So it seems like we prefer humans, but depends which human, right? It doesn't even say what kind of criminal, just criminal, Maybe they stole a gum from the convenience store. Less than a dog, right? Very interesting. Good catch. What else do you see? Yes, please. Sorry? Girls over boys, yeah. Where is this here? Yeah, here. Yeah, this is kind of slight, but it is interesting. So we have girls and boys. Good. What else? The boy over the pregnant woman. Yeah, they're kind of close to one another. I actually think that like having the pregnant woman up there. So, if you're a woman and you don't like where you are, usually the way for you to protect yourself is to do what? Get pregnant, and then you just like jump. Self-driving autonomous vehicle is going to save you, right? But it's interesting. It's lower than boy and girl, but having a human within you is going to elevate your status. Let's say that people operate based on, let's say that Tesla decides, okay, moral machines, this is how we're going to program things, then this might be a way for you to save your life more. Yeah, good. Thank you. A pregnant thing is an interesting positioning over there. Anything else you notice? All men, all women, yeah. They both feel a little bit close to one another, right? They're very close. But that the elderly are over there, like less than a homeless person, less than a large man. I don't know. Large man? What is a large man? I don't even know what that is. But we've got like a bunch of weird stuff here, like an athlete and an executive. Like why does having a doctor? So I guess my little sister is doing better here. We need to see where psychologists are, or professors. Yeah, but some weird things over here. Stroller. I guess that means like babies are very, very highly valued. So age definitely has something to do with it. So this was mentioned a bunch of times here. So interesting, very, very interesting aspects to this. Yeah, let's do this. One last form. One of the people who created this experiment, just a very brief note from them.
So this is what we did. With my collaborators, Jean-Francois Bonnefond and Azim Sharif, we ran a survey in which we presented people with these types of scenarios. And we gave them two options, inspired by two philosophers, Jeremy Bentham and Immanuel Kant. Bentham says the car should follow utilitarian ethics. It should take the action that will minimize total harm, even if that action will kill a bystander, and even if that action will kill the passenger. Immanuel Kant says the car should follow duty-bound principles, like thou shalt not kill. So you should not take an action that explicitly harms a human being, and you should let the car take its course, even if that's going to harm more people. What do you think? Bentham or Kant? Here's what we found. Most people sided with Bentham. So it seems that people want cars to be utilitarian, minimize total harm, and that's what we should all do. Problem solved. But there is a little catch. When we asked people whether they would purchase such cars, they said absolutely not. They would like to buy cars that protect them at all costs, but they want everybody else to buy cars that minimize harm.
That's really social psychology. So even when you think you've come to some agreement about what the moral principles are, but when faced with money, buying a car, and the prospects of losing your own life, it seems like people do not think of it in the same way. So lots of cartoons keep coming out of this. It's like driverless cars should sacrifice their passengers and save more pedestrians, except my car, of course. And that's here. Maybe some people, a woman can get pregnant and then jump into next to the boy and the girl and the stroller. But maybe in some way, people will sell some devices that would allow self-driving autonomous vehicles to see you as a baby or as a boy or a girl, and then would protect you more. So it looks like a joke. I think when this came up, people thought that this was a joke, but I don't think this is going to be a joke for much longer. When these things come out, this is going to be a big issue. Finally, the last set of findings that I want to share with you, and this is a really interesting experiment, just to explain to you how these things happen. So I was, this is, I think, in Sweden, very similar. I lived in the Netherlands before, so I'm familiar with this. I think in some places in Hong Kong, you have, I saw them installing these recycling machines down. I've never used them. Did you use the recycling machines down there? You have? But I haven't. I don't know how they work. But in the Netherlands and in Sweden, what happens is that you get your bottles, it could be plastic or glass or whatever, aluminum or whatever cans you're using. And then when you go to the supermarket, there's a machine next to it. And the more that you feed the machine, the more money you will get as a coupon that you can use in the supermarket. And this incentivizes people to recycle their bottles. This experiment did something very, very interesting. So you can see here that you have two options. One is to get the money to take as a coupon, and the other is you can donate it. So a good cause, a very familiar cause, a cause that somebody, and the average person would definitely support. And the question is, when you feed the recycling, what would you choose? There's a moral dilemma here. Should I give the money away, or should I take the money that I was planning to use as a coupon to support my grocery? So when they added this one option to donate, something very interesting happened. It seems like the overall use of the recycling machine went down in those specific machines. But when they looked at machines overall, machines that were not changed, all the recycling that was done all over that city where they conducted this experiment, the recycling was exactly the same. What this means is that people were avoiding the machines that had the moral dilemma in order to go to machines that would not have them face that moral dilemma. They could very well go to the same machine and choose not to donate. They could do that, but they chose not to face the moral dilemma and not to go to that supermarket that they used to go, and instead to change to perhaps a different supermarket that's familiar, just that they don't have to face the moral dilemma. And this is important because when we want people to think about these moral dilemmas, let's say, for example, Tesla decides that when you get your new car, self-driving autonomous vehicle, Tesla, you sit down and for 10 hours, you need to answer trolley dilemma problems. You need to program your car. Do people want to do that? Do they want it to come pre-programmed, or do they want to have it their own way? It just seems in general, people are not inclined to want to put themselves in a situation where they have to face a moral dilemma. Definitely the case for my mother. I think for a lot of people, especially when it comes to, am I going to sacrifice myself? Am I going to sacrifice somebody else? The pedestrians? So all these things are very, very difficult for us to think about. It seems like a fun game in the moral machines, but there are some consequences. So even when it comes to, do I take the money or donate, people don't want to do this. They just go to a different machine. It seems like this has really implications for the trolley dilemma as well, just like the video that we saw. People just don't want to face these situations. They don't want to have to do this. And then I found a few other replications of this. So it seems like in the opera, they had people stand out of the opera and harass people all the time. Please donate, please donate, please donate. And then something very typical happened. You just saw that the people that were harassed for the shows that they were harassed at did not buy subscriptions to the opera a year later. People just don't want to have to face these moral dilemmas all the time or be harassed by moral dilemmas all the time. And then a meta-analysis, I know this group very well, and they did a meta-analysis just showing, the level of temptation, the level of harm, and showing all of that. So they analyzed 33,603, a lot of participants by the thousands, 56 different treatments. It just seems like people want to be willful, ignorant of the possibility of all kinds of consequences of their decisions. So people willfully decide to be ignorant in order not to know what will happen as a result of what it is that they do. So it seems like a very interesting research direction, many ways to approach this from different angles. And that brings us to the end of this. So at the beginning, we started from something very simple, hypothetical scenario. We all know this, the trolley dilemma. What are you going to do? Starting from a lever. And then we understood there's some complexity because exactly the same utilitarian choice reverses when you put yourself in a situation where you need to push a person, or if you need to decide whether you sacrifice yourself or not. Then we took this a step further to look at how do we judge people that make such decisions? Do we trust some people more? We thought at the beginning it was going to be the ontologists that are preferred over utilitarians, but then we understood that there is a moderation there with science people. And then we took this to a whole different other level of trying to understand. Maybe there's a way to test this, not just hypothetical, but also in real life. Right? So at the beginning, we saw this with mice, and then we saw this with a TV show. Right? And finally, we understood why this is all very important, because in the last 10 years, we're having a revolution, not just the AIs that can simulate people, but also we have self-driving autonomous vehicles. And somebody's going to need to make this kind of decision. So one of the biggest experiments ever in psychology, still ongoing, still you can play with this, a lot of insights in there, constructed this kind of thing, but there's lots of biases. Social psychology really comes into play. So if at the beginning you thought, okay, of all of the psychology department, what is the least interesting? We want to do clinical, we want to do neuro, we want to do educational, developmental. These are the important things that have impact. Actually, right now, social psychology is one of the domains where you're going to have the largest impact. If you do any research on any one of these things, you're going to have implications for the entire society, because right now we're facing a lot of challenges, just like the one with self-driving autonomous vehicles, where they need people to come and do real research, to give real insights. This is why it's very, very important that we do this together. So your second project, now you need to plan for this in the team contract. Actually, we're trying to gain some of these insights. I'm crowdsourcing the hypotheses from you. You need to come up with your own factors on how people think about doing good. How do people compare charities? We're going to talk about that project. But in social psychology, there's a lot of potential for you to do good. Okay? So more on this to come. Next, we're going to talk about all kinds of challenges in science. How do we increase the credibility of science? And we're going to tackle the first project that we have. So don't forget, by next week, with the team contracts, if you have any questions, please do use us. Write to us on Twitter, and we'll try to be responsive and we'll answer you. I'll see you next week.